LBR LBO Debrief, Business Climate Outlook of 2016.
2015 has been a momentous year for Sri Lanka. So we started the year with an election, and Sri Lankan citizens demonstrated outstanding political awareness and maturity and instituted a regime change. So that was something nobody expected few weeks earlier or few months or previous year. So that also reflects what is behind the resilience of this nation, resilience of this country. That whenever there is a threat whenever there is an existential threat to the nation, there is always a change. So what we are going to see is not just a regime change, but a change in the political economic order in this country. Okay. Recently, Prime Minister mentioned that we are going through a non-agatya. Okay. That's kind of a period of where you're not doing anything serious until things settle down during the seasonal New Year period. That's to my understanding. So what we like to see is change in socio-economic political order can take time. We got to have patience, but we as a nation, everyone has a role to play. Next few years, there are few challenges the nation is facing: achieving growth, but achieving inclusive growth. If you do not have inclusive growth, we are not going to have social justice. Absence of social justice will breed social unrest, and we will see insurgencies once again. So the future, to make the country prosperous, it's not just the growth at any cost, but the inclusive growth, which comes with sustainability and social justice. The second challenge is how we will restructure the economy in such a way that we will not get into a middle-income economic trap, that we can enhance our economic capabilities, our production capabilities, we can uplift our product quality, and move the whole economy up in the value chain. So that demands a structural change to our economy. For you to enable those structural changes, obviously, third aspect is we need reforms. So each one of us, regardless of the nature of the business we are in, regardless of the positions we hold in our organization, we have to play a significant role to move the country forward. For that, we need to have awareness on, what is the state of the economy, globally, regionally, and locally. So what are the government policies, and how are we going to manage our enterprises in the evolving context of economic, political, and social landscape? So that's why we are here. Very warm welcome to all of you. So taking one day off in a very difficult period of this year, of the year. Generally, December is not the best time to have any conference. Either we are cleaning our desk before we go on holidays, or most of the companies are engaged in fine-tuning their budgets and their plans for next year. So this is a very difficult time to get time off. But we are very glad 200 people have decided, yes, we will take a chance, so we will take a break and join this session. So thank you so much, and very welcome to all of you joining us today. And a very warm welcome to our speakers. We have two speakers who are specially flown for the event, and we have some other foreign speakers who are based in Sri Lanka, and also our own Sri Lankan world-class experts joining a number of panels and presentations within the next 1 hour. Within the next 8 hours. So it's going to be fully packed sessions. Those who have attended our events in the past, our schedules are very tight. We try to cram the 8 hours with as many presentations as possible. Unfortunately, therefore, we will not have a tea break in the morning. Tea will be served at table, but you're most welcome to take a break, and you can go out. take refreshments and, come back. So we will be, once we start at 9 o'clock, 8:55, we will move till 1 o'clock, then we take a break, lunch break, and then we're back by 2 o'clock. So let me quickly take you through the agenda. We will start the sessions with a presentation from IMF resident representative about the global economic outlook and what are the challenges ahead of us. That will be followed by a presentation by a World Bank economist, senior economist, who will take us through the status of key markets, UK, USA, EU, China, Russia, Japan, and some of the other markets which are important for us. Then this time, we have introduced a new session. We call it India and Developing Asia. Because most of the companies now looking at Bangladesh, Myanmar, Vietnam, Cambodia for expansion, for investments, as well as for trade. So all the time we talk about the Western markets, and we rarely talk about, what is in the backyard of our own region. So we will have one session focusing on developing Asia. Then we will have a presentation on evolving geopolitical climate, the shifting geopolitics of the globally as well as to some extent regionally, and how these things are going to affect us. And finally, we'll have our Nishan Dimel speaking about, what can we expect in the global, in Sri Lankan context and in Sri Lankan economy. With that, we will wind up the first 5 presentations, and then we move over to a panel discussion to discuss how these changes, how these trends are going to affect our economy and also our business. So we will break for lunch, and after lunch we will have 2 very brief presentations. One on the highlights of the budget, which is supposed to be a revolutionary budget, and we will see how revolutionary it is. It certainly is revolutionary because it is talking about vehicles driven by, propelled by helium. So for that, I think Finance Minister is going to be nominated for Prize of Chemistry, and also naming it as discovering that helium is a combustible element, he will likely to get Nobel Prize of Physics as well. So that's a great achievement for Sri Lanka. So we'll have the discussion on budget, and after that, recently, I think on the 5th of November, Prime Minister made a statement about the policy, and there are 4 aspects in that policy statement. Deshal is going to make a very brief presentation, and then we will have a discussion on how the budget, key aspects of the budget and the policy statement, what these things mean to private sector. Finally, we have 4 industry leaders joining us. How are we going to navigate your enterprises in this whole evolving, emerging socio-political economic scenario? So Peter D. Almeida is going to chair that session, and we will have 4 industry leaders. And with that, we close the formal session, and then we will have the most looked forward to event of the day, that's cocktails. So that's the day's agenda. A few more things. First, I believe that all of you received an email from us yesterday. If you have not downloaded the mobile app, I would invite you to download it from Google Play and also from Apple Store. So the details are in the back page of your folder. Why I request you to download it, you can read through the biodata of speakers. In the interest of time, we don't read lengthy biodata because they are all in the web. We have sent the links. We have requested you to study the bios of speakers, and you can refer. Also, some of the presentations have detailed slides, which may not be very visible. So I invite you to go to www.lbo.lk/debrief. You can download all 5 presentations and 3 or 4 notes. There's a note from Deshal, there's a note from Shriyan, and then there's a note from Amal Sandaratna. So I would invite you to, our site is mobile responsive site, so you can download some of these presentations so you can refer to it. And the most important thing is, how do we interact in our sessions? You can use a mobile phone and send a text, or you can use the mobile app and send a Twitter. And all that is aggregated in an application, and we pass it over to the session chair, and the panelists will see the questions emerging real time on the screen, and all of you will see that in the big screen. So keep texting your comments and your questions starting from the first presentation. What are your expectations? Then there may be certain areas that you would like to clarify further. Once you go to our website, you will see post a question icon. So if you would like to post a question to a specific speaker, you could do so. So we will forward that to that particular resource personnel. So we are leveraging digital technology to the maximum to ensure that you have enriched, debrief experience. So please remember to use your mobile phone, and all the details are here. How to download your mobile app, and also how to interact through Twitter, and also using your mobile phone. So that's about it. So that's a very brief introduction. So how the day will progress. So we are here to get enlightened, enhance our knowledge, and get a deeper understanding about global economy, local economy, and the regional economy, and how the geopolitics will play out in the global scenario, regional scenario, coming 12 months. Recently, a very close friend of mine, a very senior technology executive, told me, Lakshman, you mean to say that I have to sit there and listen to these, 5 lectures, half day, and those are not things I will pay attention to my day-to-day operations. But 200 of you thought differently. Okay. Some of the things that we are going to discuss here, you will not be able, perhaps you might find difficult to understand. People who are not very familiar with economics, that is fine. But I think even if we can absorb 20%, 30%, and help that in strategizing our businesses, I think that is a great achievement. So what we are trying to do is to enhance the economics knowledge, enhance the understanding how the global economy works, enhance our corporate executives' knowledge about the government policy, enhance our people's ability to read a budget. So I think it is going to be intellectually challenging, and I wish you all the very best, and please enjoy the day. So it is now my pleasure to invite Dr. Eteri, President Representative of IMF of Sri Lanka and Maldives, to make her very brief presentation. Now, I do not intend to insult her nationality, disrespect her nationality by attempting to pronounce a second name. So I will stick to the first name. Erika, I would like to present to Dr. Eteri.
LBR LBO Debrief, Business Climate Outlook of 2016.
Thank you very much for an introduction. And I'm very pleased to be at this very interesting event and address you all and discuss global and regional issues and also local Sri Lankan challenges and opportunities this morning. Thank you, Lakshman, for reaching out to me and inviting me here to present our point of view. As you all know, International Monetary Fund is concerned with macroeconomic issues, and our mandate is to look globally what are the macroeconomic developments as well as risks and opportunities. We also look into regional contexts, and finally we look on individual countries and try to assess how global environment and regional issues may impact individual countries' risks and opportunities. So my presentation as well, it will start with discussing main issues in the current global outlook. Then I will zoom into region, talking about Asia-Pacific specific issues. And finally, we'll discuss some of the risks and opportunities that face Sri Lankan economy in the current context. So let's start with the global economy. Global growth is disappointing and uneven, and at the same time we see that risks to the outlook have increased. Global growth is projected at 3.1% in 2015, which is lower than last year, and we expect that growth is going to accelerate only slightly in 2016. So this growth performance is driven by recovery in advanced economies, but we see that emerging markets are slowing down for a fifth consecutive year. If we look on emerging markets as a group, we see that China is slowing down, and that's a significant transition that has ripple effects regionally and as well as globally, and I'll be talking about a little bit later on. We see Brazil and Russia and BRICS in general slowing down significantly as they are major commodity exporters. But we see India as a bright spot and performing quite well, supported by lower commodity prices and as well as strong domestic demand. We also see weaker activity in low-income and developing countries. So there are three major forces that are affecting global outlook in the world. First is China's economic transformation. Second is decline in commodity prices, and third is monetary policy normalization in US. I'll be talking about these transitional effects one by one. So we see that China is rebalancing away from export-driven growth to more domestic consumption-driven growth. So it means that China will be doing less of commodity-intensive investment and more of consumption-driven growth. It will be more services and less manufacturing in China's growth outlook. It means that China's overall growth will become lower compared to 10% rates and higher, which we have been seeing before, but probably this growth will be healthier than before. So it's a complex transition which has significant spillover effects through China's supply chains in the region, but as well as globally. We see that it has impact on commodity prices because China was one of the major commodity importers, and many countries have relied on China's demand. But now those countries are affected by lower demand and lower commodity prices, and they are slowing down significantly. So if we see across commodity exporters, we see that they are slowing down, their growth performance is lower, and they are also facing a longer period of lower commodity prices. Obviously, slow growth performance has an impact on exchange rates, especially for commodity exporters who have who have flexible exchange rate regimes. We saw that across different commodity exporters, exchange rates have depreciated, which reflects fundamental change in their growth outlook. We see that in advanced economies, those exchange rate depreciations in recent times have been less, signaling that fundamentals of those economies may be improving compared to advanced economies. At the same time, we saw that exchange rate depreciation in China in this August had additional ripple effects across commodity exporters and across the globe, triggering additional depreciations of these currencies. We also saw changes in capital flows. In general, capital is gradually flowing out from emerging markets, and especially Asian emerging markets, which have been linked to China and are connected to China through their supply chains. Peak of those capital outflows have been in August, which was associated with renminbi depreciation. So with US policy rate normalization, which means that interest rates in US will start increasing gradually, we may see that capital flows will continue to fly out from Asian region. So overall, this outlook, as said, has three major transitional effects playing a significant role. First is China's slowdown. Second is the long period of low commodity prices. And third is US policy rate normalization. And all these three forces are interconnected and pose significant risks and volatilities to the overall global outlook. So as you could see, global outlook has a very wide range where it could turn out because there is so much risk and volatility built into this outlook. So now let's zoom into Asian region and see how Asia and Pacific is performing in this overall global environment. Asia is doing quite well compared to the other regions. As you could see, Asia's average growth rate will be around 5.4%, which is much higher than any other region. So just by that growth differential, Asia will remain an attractive region for investment and for doing business compared to other regions in the world. But if we look on the average, we see that there is significant heterogeneity in the growth performance across different countries in Asia. We see across the board that commodity exporters, and especially countries in East Asia who are linked through supply chains to China, are slowing down. And that's a significant impact of China's transition. We saw also that New Zealand, Australia, also commodity exporters are slowing down. At the same time, we see that India is performing quite well. So looking on South Asian region in general, South Asia in overall Asian region is more insulated from China impact because there is not such a strong linkage with supply chains to China. So as a result, growth performance in these countries remain relatively strong and stable. We are projecting that Sri Lanka's growth rate going to be around 5.5%, which is higher than regional average, and Sri Lanka will be performing relatively strongly compared to the other countries in the region. Now let's look on Sri Lanka's vulnerabilities and opportunities in this global transition. Obviously, looking on the global and regional outlook and seeing how many risky, volatile, transitional effects are at play in the current global environment, it is important that every individual country strengthens its own house and its own policy buffers to be able to withstand some of the risks and volatilities that may come on its way from the global outlook. One of the significant vulnerabilities that we have been highlighting in Sri Lanka now for many years is its external vulnerability. Sri Lanka has relatively low reserve coverage, which we will be looking at later on, and it's also running current account deficits for an extensive period of time. Sri Lanka is a commodity importer, so thinking that, okay, you are operating in a low commodity price environment, when oil prices have declined, it should have brought significant savings to Sri Lanka's current account. For example, in past year, when oil prices fell significantly. And potential saving from that lower oil prices in balance of payment could have been in range of $1.5 billion US dollars, which is quite significant share in the overall reserve position. However, most of those savings have not materialized. And main reason for that was significant fiscal expansion through increases in wages and salaries that effectively leaked out through non-oil imports. So what happened, people who got boost to their consumption power went and mainly bought durables and small-size vehicles. So as a result, your reserve position and your external balance has deteriorated, while in current environment, if this has not happened, you could have had significant savings in your reserve position. At the same time, we have seen capital outflow from capital and financial account. It's not unusual. We see a similar trend across many Asian countries and emerging markets. And in Sri Lanka, that outflow was very gradual, and it continues to be gradual. But combination of these two effects, outflows from capital and financial account, and very high non-oil import bill, translated into pressures on reserves. Now, pressures on reserves and on external position in general. So how those pressures have been addressed and accommodated. As you could look, and here in this chart, I presented Asian economies, those pressures have been at play also in most of Asian economies. And their response to foreign exchange pressures was mainly through adjustment in exchange rate and less in depletion of reserves. And most of those countries have much higher reserve buffers than Sri Lanka. So if you look on this chart, blue portions shows how pressures on external account have been accommodated through contribution of exchange rate, and lighter portion shows how those have been accommodated by depletion of reserves. As you could see, Sri Lanka stands out that most of these pressures have been accommodated by depletion of reserves, and there was contribution from exchange rate adjustment as well. Now, why it may be a concern for Sri Lanka context? Because Sri Lanka has relatively low reserve coverage. And that's something that we have been identifying as one of the vulnerabilities in Sri Lankan economy. And most of Sri Lanka's reserves are also borrowed reserves. So across relatively long period of time, Sri Lanka was not able to generate sufficient foreign exchange through its economic activity to meet its own demand on foreign exchange. So as a result, it has borrowed foreign exchange abroad, and most of its reserves currently is borrowed rather than generated from its own economic activity. Second major vulnerability is, of course, fiscal vulnerability. And as said when discussing external issues, these two vulnerabilities are obviously interconnected. When you have fiscal expansion, most of it and it stimulates consumption, given that it's an island economy, most of it leaks out through imports, and as a result, you have impact on your current account position. So Sri Lanka's biggest fiscal vulnerability comes from the fact that Sri Lanka has one of the lowest revenue collections in the world. And actually, tax revenue productivity has been declining across years. So if you compare Sri Lanka to other countries in the region, corporate income tax productivity in Sri Lanka is the lowest. There is nobody else in the region who has as low corporate tax productivity as Sri Lanka. If we look on income tax productivity and VAT productivity, it plays out the same way. So you could look at it as a negative, but you could look at it as an opportunity as well, because it seems that Sri Lanka has a huge potential to improve its tax productivity and generate its own revenues. Why it's important that you are able to generate your own revenue sources? Because you could meet your own spending needs on expenditure, on social development, on inclusive aspects of your development. You don't need to borrow that money if you are able to generate your own revenues. And this chart shows that there is huge potential which has not been really explored in Sri Lanka in terms of its own revenue generating capacity. Now, let me talk a little bit about business environment. This is a famous doing business report chart, which shows that, overall, Sri Lanka fares relatively well compared to other countries in the region in terms of its ease of doing business environment. That said, this region is generally perceived as a difficult region to do business, and obviously there is huge opportunity to ease doing business environment here in Sri Lanka as well. As Lakshman made an introduction, there was tectonic transitions in this environment politically. But if we abstract from political transition and just look on economic evolution, there were kind of two distinct periods, and you are entering into third very important period. First period was long period of war, which has affected expectations and economic performance of everybody who wanted to do business here. Obviously, expectations were relatively short-term, and the environment was very risky. So you went through a period of peace. Transition from war to peace was accompanied with significant infrastructure scale-up, which has happened in a very short period of time, only 5 years. So you could think that probably 15 years worth of infrastructure was constructed only in 5 years. And now you are embarking at completely a new path in terms of your transition, where you have two advantages. You have peace, where you have luxury to have longer term expectations and less risky environment, and you have significant new topography of a new infrastructure. What you could do with that? I think there is huge potential for private sector to utilize these two new dimensions. Peace, which comes with longer term expectations, and new infrastructure, which opens opportunities for new businesses. Sri Lanka could position itself very competitively compared to the region, because if you look on South Asia, I don't think anybody has combination of relative peace and this quality infrastructure anywhere. I think it's up to you, people in this room, to decide how you could utilize those opportunities and what you need to do to have more innovation and searching and learning new dimensions of business development in Sri Lanka context. Finally, I want to highlight one aspect that is quite close to heart of my institution's managing director, Christine Lagarde, and actually she was asking about this. If you look on labor market participation across the globe, and especially in Sri Lanka, you see that there is huge opportunity to boost labor market participation. But important dimension to that is female labor force. I'm very happy to see that there are quite a number of ladies present in this room. Sri Lanka stands out because it has very high education attainment levels, but female participation in labor force is as low as Bangladesh, or as low as India. And actually, compared to the education attainment level, India is obviously well behind of Sri Lanka. So opportunity remains there. Why your educated female labor force is not able to utilize its productivity. And maybe there could be additional significant gains if there are more participation opportunities for for female labor force. Actually, there were calculations done in IMF saying that Sri Lanka's GDP could be growing, Sri Lanka's GDP could be 20% higher if female labor force had an opportunity to participate and contribute productively. So I leave it to you as one of the dimensions of inclusive growth and opportunities that Sri Lanka may try to utilize. So looking at the summary and finalizing my presentations, obviously we saw that global outlook is very challenging. There are many risks and there are many volatilities that may be affecting individual countries. I think this challenging environment poses opportunity for individual countries to boost their macro fundamentals so they are able to withstand external shocks much better and they are able to address their own social and inclusive growth issues. So reforms are needed to address vulnerabilities and to sustain transformation in near term and also long term. So policy priorities for Sri Lanka is obviously addressing those vulnerabilities. First of all, getting revenue back on track and being able to generate your own revenue sources. So you are meeting your own infrastructure and social development needs without much borrowing. And second of all, think about structural reforms so you could increase your overall productivity and position yourself more competitively in the region and also at the global map. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
LBR LBO Debrief, Business Climate Outlook of 2016.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eteri, for that presentation on what we can expect